Welcome back, my fellow peanuts, and welcome to anyone who is new to this channel or to my podcast. Now, this podcast covers true crime cases that may not be suitable for young listeners, so listener and viewer discretion is advised. So, thank you all so much for watching my mini-series again, guys. This is a lot of different sort of dynamics that I'm sort of dealing with at the moment just because I'm so well versed in like serial killers. But this kind of stuff, like, of course, I've watched documentaries on them and stuff like this. But this has definitely opened up my eyes to a little bit more of what I want to investigate after I've finished all my states on serial killers. So it's one of those things that really intrigues me, but at the same time, it makes me a little bit sad when I watch these documentaries and when I sort of delve into the victims and all those kind of components. So in the background today, guys, we've got a new book bag that I've got from BookBox. If you haven't had a chance to go and watch my BookBox reveal, every month I get a new BookBox. It's a fabulous Australian company. It's really awesome. This isn't an ad, by the way. This is me just like plugging them just because they're so amazing. So I've got a little book bag in the background because I'm a romantasy reader on top of other things, by the way. But in particular at the moment, this book was awesome. Absolutely loved it. And then we've got obviously Snoopy's in the background. You will see Miss Charlie going in and out of frame today. So it's one of those mornings it's a little bit cooler than usual. So I've got a heater going as well. Hello again. So in today's episode, what I'm going to be focusing on is the flaws in the justice system through a couple of different stories. Now, these guys are often called the West Memphis Three. We've got the Central Park Five, and we've got Kalief Browder. Kalief Browder, I believe it was pronounced. So I do apologize if I've pronounced that incorrectly. Now, the three from West Memphis, a lot of people call them the West Memphis Three, but I really do think after watching a documentary on them in particular, I think that should be saved for the boys that were murdered. I think they should be called the West Memphis Three. This is a really, really sad story, guys, because three innocent boys went to jail, or what I perceive them as innocent boys, and three little boys died. It's really, really sad because I truly believe that the real murderers have never been found. So let's set the scene a little bit. In 1993 in West Memphis, Arkansas, the town was shaken by the murders of three young boys. Three teenagers, which would be Damien Eccles, Jesse Miss Jr., and Jason Baldwin, were arrested and convicted despite lacking physical evidence linking them to the crime. Now, the prosecution's theory of a satanic ritual fed into a lot of that panic around this time. Public outcry grew as doubts they started to surface quite a bit, and that was fueled by documentaries and celebrity support. I believe it was Johnny Depp who very first sort of focused in on this one. I can't be sure, but I do vaguely remember. I don't know if it was in a documentary or if it's something I've just read in passing. So I do believe it was Johnny Depp. In 2007, new DNA evidence emerged that did not match the victims or the accused. The Arkansas Supreme Court acknowledged that there were some trial issues like jury misconduct. It was just not great. So in 2011, the boys entered what's called alpha pleas. That maintains that they're innocent, but they would concede that there was enough evidence that that enough evidence existed to convict. So after 18 years of spending time in prison, they were released. To sum this up a little bit, I do apologize. I'm just going to pause. So just 1 second, guys. I'm just going to pause. Sorry for pausing there, guys. My little Meggie wanted to come back inside after being outside. She is a little pampered princess. She's my little 12-year-old girl. So you're going to see her wandering around because she's just going to probably want to understand what's going on and possibly even sit by the heater. So this story in particular centers around the three boys which were murdered, which was Steve Edward Branch, Christopher Mark Byers, and James Michael Moore. They were all second graders at Weaver Elementary School, and they were best friends in their Club Scout pack. Steve Branch was just 8 years old, a bright blonde-haired honours student. He lived with his mum Pamela, his stepfather Terry Hobbs, and his little sister Amanda. He loved riding his black and red bicycle and was last seen wearing blue jeans and a white t-shirt. He now resides in Mount Zion Cemetery in Steele, Missouri. Then you've got Christopher Byers. He was also 8 years old. He was described from his mum as a typical child who still believed in the Easter Bunny and Santa Claus, and he had light brown hair and a really gentle little spirit. He lived with his mum, Melissa, and adoptive dad, John Mark Byers, and along with his stepbrother, Sean. Now, he was last seen in blue jeans as well, but this time with a long white sleeved shirt. He's buried in the Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis, Tennessee. The next little boy was Michael Moore. Even though his first name was James, he was still called Michael. So Michael Moore was the third of the trio, and he was considered the leader of the group, I guess. He was 8 years old as well, with brown hair and a love for his Boy Scout uniform, which he proudly wore even outside of his Scout meetings. So he lived with his parents, Todd and Dana Moore, and also with his sister, Dawn. He was last seen riding his light green bicycle, and he was dressed in a Scout shirt and hat. Michael's buried in the Crittenden Memorial Park in Marion, Arkansas. Just 1 second.
Charlotte, enough. Stop that.
Sorry, she's being very, very naughty. So in 1994, a memorial was actually erected in the playground of the Weaver Elementary School. It's a tribute to the boys who once actually played there. And in 2013, on the 20th anniversary of their deaths, the school principal, Grissom, she led efforts to refurbish the memorial, ensuring that the memory continues to be honoured. So when they were arrested, Jesse was 17, Jason Baldwin was 16, and Damien Eccles was 18. Now, Baldwin and Eccles, they've got some minor legal issues like vandalism and shoplifting, but Jesse Miscarriage, he actually is known for having quite the temper and fights. And Damien was a school dropout, and Baldwin, so Jason Baldwin, he highly excelled academically, and he was encouraged to actually pursue graphic design. I'm now going to just refer to them by their last names, by the way, guys, just because that's a way that I sort of did my research, and it was just a little bit easier. So Eccles and Baldwin, while they're close friends, they would bond over music, books, and feeling just sort of out of place in what was considered a really conservative sort of town, West Memphis. Miss Gelly, he knew them from school, but wasn't sort of in the inner circle with them. So Eccles' life was unfortunately marred by poverty and instability, with frequent visits from social workers and a rare school attendance. After he broke into a trailer during a storm, it was only then that he actually faced criminal charges. He later spent time in a mental institution and received full disability benefits. So at the trial, a psychiatrist actually testified that Eccles suffered from severe mental illness, delusions, hallucinations, and quite a disordered way of thinking. And at his sentencing hearing, another psychologist revealed that Eccles had claimed to gain superpowers by drinking human blood. At the time of his arrest, he's working part-time for a roofing company and expecting a child with his girlfriend, Dominique Tier. Police officers by the name of James Sadbury and Steve Jones believed that the crime sort of had some cult overtones. Eccles, he's already got an interest sort of in that cult. He becomes a person of interest because of this. Now, a polygraph test suggested possible deception. And after an interview, Eccles mentioned that one of the victims had some genital injuries, something that police hadn't actually apparently released. That raised some red flags. Now, there's no physical evidence at this stage linking Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly to the crime at all. With no leads after weeks, police actually ended up focusing really heavily on Damien Eccles. On June 3rd, they questioned Miss Kelly, who is 17, with an IQ of only 72. This is also done without his parents' consent, and it's done for 12 hours, and only 46 minutes of this interview is actually recorded. I've got to say, I'm going to have a real rant here. That is appalling to me. He is already what I would call mentally challenged with an IQ of 72. He's not going to know what's right and wrong necessarily of what the police officers are doing to him. He's held there for 12 hours and less than an hour of footage is recorded. As far as I'm concerned, that is appalling behaviour by a police department. I don't even know how they thought that they could get away with that or what they were doing at the time. It really quite concerns me, if I'm perfectly honest, and especially after watching some documentaries. It did seem like there was a massive amount of pressure for that police department to find these killers. But at the risk of sounding pompous is probably the word I'm going to use for myself here. Surely you'd want to get the right people, though. You wouldn't want to just pigeonhole, these boys are a little bit different. They focus on other things. They listen to metal. They listen to music about, Satan and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily make them bad people. Like, it's a way of life. And especially, again, guys, this is a really conservative town, real Baptist, real religious. So it's really focused heavily on this satanic ritual behind the murders. Miscarriage quickly recants. He claimed it was coercion and a misunderstanding of his rights, and the Arkansas Supreme Court ruled that actually his confession was voluntary. And this leaked confession led to the arrests of Eccles and Baldwin. 8 months later, despite his lawyer's advice to stay silent, Miscarriage actually detailed the murders in another statement. So his lawyer, Dan Stidham, I believe it the way as he pronounced it, later criticised the investigation. He's calling out massive errors. He's saying there's massive misconceptions. He even would speak about it on a radio quite a number of years later. At the trial, the psychiatrist, the evidence is really, really thin for physical evidence. 2 green threads and a red fibre allegedly were similar to items in the boys' clothes and their homes, but under questioning, the expert admitted that many fibres look alike. The evidence really didn't prove much. Then comes their star witness, Vicky Hutchinson. She's a new person in West Memphis. She'd become a key witness in this. She later recants, though, saying that police would pressure her to lie. So it's in May 1993. The bodies hadn't been found yet. The boys were still missing, but something strange was starting to unfold in this police department. Vicky Hutchinson, she's been brought in for a polygraph test. She was suspected of stealing money from her employer. Now, Detective Don Bray was set to administer the exam, but there was a complication. Hutchinson's young son, Aaron, was actually in the room. He's restless, he's distracting. Bray couldn't actually end up completing the test because of these distractions. Then Aaron says something really unexpected during this time. He tells Bray that the boys, his playmates, had actually been killed at the playhouse. Later that same day, the bodies were discovered. So they're found near an area that Aaron actually had described. Bray would ask him for more details, but what came next was actually quite chilling. Aaron claimed that he'd witnessed the murders. He said that they were committed by Satanists who spoke Spanish. But Aaron's story, it really just doesn't hold up. His statements were really inconsistent. He couldn't identify Baldwin, Eccles, or Miscarriage in photo lineups. And there was no playhouse at the location that he pointed to. Still, a police officer would leak parts of Aaron's accounts to the press. The story spread really quickly, and with it, a growing belief that the murders were all a part of this satanic ritual. So later, Vicky tells the police that she, Eccles, and Miscarriage had attended a Wiccan gathering where Eccles had bragged about the murders, but she couldn't remember where it was, who else was there. She was never actually charged with the theft. She admitted that she lied to avoid prosecution and maybe even to claim the reward. You've got so many different inconsistencies. Now, there is a speculation that where the boys' bodies were found, though, they weren't necessarily killed there. So maybe there is some truth to what Aaron was saying. Maybe there was some type of playhouse, and maybe he did actually see something as such, but you just can't necessarily go off his word without at least the follow-ups. So in 1994, the trials begin, and Jesse Miscarriage Jr., he's tried separately from Damien Eccles and Jason Baldwin. The reason, it's a legal safeguard known as the Brutton Rule. It meant that Miscarriage's confession couldn't be used against his co-defendants, so the cases were actually split. Now, all 3 of these guys, they had plead not guilty, and at Jesse's trial, Miscarriage, the defense brought in Richard Offshe, a renowned expert on false confessions and police coercion. Now, he's called the brief recording on his interrogation a classic example of coercion. And there were problems with the confession itself because Miscarriage, his statements were riddled with inconsistencies, both with each other and the actual crime scene. So even Though he claimed to have seen Damien Eccles rape one of the boys, there's actually no physical evidence of rape. The dilation of the victims' anuses, which police had cited, was later explained as normal post-mortem conditions. So a rape never actually happened. On February 5th in 1994, the jury found Miss Kelly guilty on one count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to life plus 40 years. His appeal was denied. 3 weeks later, Eccles and Baldwin stood trial together. Now, the prosecution leaned really heavily on the idea of this satanic ritual. They even brought in Dale Griffiths, a so-called expert in the cult, though he held a degree from an uncredited university. So you are seeing a number of inconsistencies already in this. So it's really horrible. So in March 1994, both were found guilty on all accounts. Eccles was actually sentenced to death. Baldwin received life in prison. The defense argued that Eccles' knowledge of the crime scene, like the genital mutilation, could have come from news reports, even though the police said they didn't leak that. Eccles himself said he only knew because that was on TV. Now, the prosecution insisted his knowledge was too specific and too accurate. They claimed that there had been no public reporting on certain details like drowning or the extent of mutilation. Now, Eccles challenged Detectives Ridge's unrecorded conversation account, calling it inaccurate and even most of it lies. Journalist Mara Leverett suggested Eccles might have heard details from the police leaks that were happening. Now, the defense tried to block questions about Eccles' past, but they're overruled by the judge. Additionally, the investigation faced massive criticism. Dan Stidham, who was Miss Kelly's former attorney, described the crime scene as literally trampled. The creek bed where the bodies were found were disturbed before the coroner had even arrived. The bodies were pulled from the water and left exposed to sunlight and insects. The coroner wasn't called until nearly 2 hours after the first clue, a floating shoe, was discovered. The creek is not drained at the time, so evidence may have been lost at that time, and blood that is at the scene was never tested. Now, if you go and watch, there's a HBO special called Paradise Lost. That sort of gives you a really, really in-depth analysis of everything, and it's called Paradise Lost. There's no blood found at the scene at all, and this is just suggesting that the murders have occurred somewhere else, like I said before. So police records were a giant mess. Leverett described them as disorderly, and that's putting it really quite mildly. The West Memphis Police Department even turned down help from the Arkansas State Police, who were investigating them for actually being on unrelated misconduct. So whilst I never want to say this about police, because I do genuinely believe that they get it right a lot of the time, they don't get it right all the time. This seems to be riddled with inconsistencies. It seems to be riddled with piss poor police work, as far as I'm concerned, and 3 boys who are just a little bit different from everybody else being like pigeonholed into, well, because you're different, you're murderers. Now, some of the evidence is even stored in supermarket paper bags, not proper containers, they're not even sealed, and then there were bite marks. Now, years after the trials, a forensic scientist by the name of Brent Turvey noticed what appeared to be human bite marks in crime scene photos. But these marks were not actually examined by a certified medical examiner until 4 years after the murders. The defense's expert said the mark wasn't from an adult bite. The state's experts disagreed. Some said it wasn't actually a bite at all. The trials were over, but the fight for justice really has only just begun. So 3 months after that trial, all 3 defendants filed appeals. Each of them was denied. But by 1996, Miss Kelly's lawyer, Dan Stidham, was preparing to take the case to the US Supreme Court. Then came a breakthrough. In 2007, Eccles petitioned for a retrial. The reason? Advances in DNA testing. Technology had massively evolved since 1994 because this is when DNA is in its infancy in the 90s, and the new tests could potentially exonerate the wrongfully convicted. But Judge David Burnett, the original trial judge, refused to allow the evidence. Can't imagine why. He doesn't want to look like he's wrong, does he? That decision, though, didn't stand for long because in 2010, the Arkansas Supreme Court overturned it for all 3 men. The DNA results were really telling. None of the samples from the crime scene matched Eccles, Baldwin, or Miss Kelly, but one hair tied into the knots, which was binding of the victims, was not inconsistent. So that's a mouthful. With the hair of Stevie Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs. Another hair matched Hobbs's friend, David Jacoby. And then came a chilling revelation from Stevie's mum, Pamela Hobbs. She found Stevie's favourite pocket knife that once she believed had been taken by the killer was actually hidden in Terry's nightstand. She also recalled the day that she recalled Terry's washing Stevie's clothes, bed linens, and curtains around sort of an odd time. It was around about the time of the murders. In 2013, Billy Wayne Stewart and Benny Guy claimed to have information linking Terry Hobbs to the murders, but police just ignored it. In 2008, it was revealed that Ken Arnold, the judge foreman in the Eccles Baldwin trial, discussed the case with an attorney before deliberations and pushed for guilt using inadmissible evidence like Miss Kelly's confession. Legal experts believed the convictions should have been overturned massively. In the same year, Dan Stidham testified that the Judge Burnett improperly communicated with the jury, suggesting they prepare for sentencing before they even reached a verdict. So he admitted he'd failed to report this and acknowledged that he didn't meet the legal requirements to represent Miss Kelly in a capital case, arguing his conviction should be vacated. Now, in 2007, when Eccles' lawyers had requested a retrial or release citing DNA evidence linking to Terry Hobbs to the crime scene and new testimony suggesting that the victim's injuries were caused by animals, not by humans, Judge Burnett denied the request again. But the Arkansas Supreme Court overturned this in November 2010, and Judge David Laser would take over the case as a judge. So in August 2011, the boys entered those Alford pleas and were released after some fairly significant negotiations. Their convictions were vacated and they were sentenced to time served. Unable to sue for wrongful imprisonment, they risked re-imprisonment if reoffending. Prosecutor Scott Ellington cited the victim's family support doubts of the witness's truthfulness and the death of a crime lab employee as reasons for the deal. Despite believing in their guilt, Scott Ellington acknowledged a new trial would likely acquit them. So the men were freed, but the truth sort of remains uncertain. As far as I'm concerned, and after watching a documentary, and I think go and watch it, right? There's a couple of them. There's a couple of them on HBO, and there's a good one on Hayu, which is Oxygen. I'll post them into the comments. Look, I don't want to, again, my opinion. I do think it was a stepfather, and I do think something was amiss in that family. I think it's really horrible to say things like this because, again, I don't want to convict someone just because of watching a documentary, so it's definitely going to lean me towards one way. But go and watch it and tell me your own opinions and comment in there, because I'm just not sure whether I'm really blindsided by the fact that the police department was so corrupt. But definitely, go and watch it for yourself. This is probably up there as one of the most heartbreaking stories of injustice. This is the Central Park Five. I want to say to anybody who is watching this video, go and watch Netflix's documentary on this. It is next level, guys. It's really, really, really horrible, and it'll break your heart even more. Kalief Browder is definitely going to break your heart more when I get to his story, but it is just buckle in because this one's heartbreaking. It's a spring night in New York City in April 19th in 1989. The kind of night where the city feels alive, it's buzzing with a lot of energy, but in Central Park, something far darker was actually unfolding. That evening, a group of around 20 to 30 teenagers entered the park. Some were there to hang out, others were there to cause trouble. What followed was a series of assaults and robberies that would be later described as a wilding spree. Amid the chaos, a 28-year-old investment banker by the name of Trisha Melly went for a jog. She never made it home. Hours later, she was found in a ravine in the northern part of the park. She'd been brutally beaten, raped, and left for dead. Her skull was fractured. She'd lost 3/4 of her blood, and she was in a coma for 12 days. The city was in a huge amount of shock by the brutality of this absolute disgusting sexual assault. It's in one of the most iconic public places. It's causing massive outrage and fear. Media headlines are surging. Politicians demanded really swift justice, and the NYPD was really quickly pressured to act quickly. Now, within 48 hours, the police had detained several teenagers from the park that night. Now, among them were Anton McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise. Ages between 14 and 16, Black and Latino, soon were the suspects of this really big high-profile crime. But what truly happened? How did the city's quest for justice result in a massive, notorious wrongful conviction? Next, we're going to examine the interrogations, the pressure, the confessions, and the flaws that were later revealed in the case. Now, after this attack, NYPD, they've got an immense amount of pressure. Police quickly focused on these boys. They were interrogated alone. Again, no parents were in these interrogations for long hours without lawyers or parents, and some of them were actually done for over 24 hours, guys. These boys are 14 to 16. What on earth? They're exhausted, they're confused. Eventually, some of them would confess, but their stories didn't match each other, the crime scene or the timeline. Yet these confessions formed the basis of the prosecution's case. Corey Wise, he's not initially known as a suspect. He went to support his friend Yusuf, but was interrogated himself. Now, at 16, he's old enough to be tried as an adult. The boys said that they thought that the police wanted help, and believing that they would actually go home and that this would be assisting the case. However, their confessions didn't match the evidence. No DNA, no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses that could link them to the scene. And despite all of this, the recorded confessions were used in court and broadcast on the news. Now, the city had its suspects and the narrative was massively set. Next, we're going to see how these confessions led to their convictions and what would be a major, huge misstep of justice. So, in 1990, the trials began for Anton McCrae, Kevin Richardson, Yusuf Salam, Raymond Santana, and Corey Wise. As I said, though, there's no DNA, there's no fingerprints, there's no eyewitnesses. The prosecution relied solely on the videotaped confessions. The defense argued that these confessions were coerced, they're from scared, manipulated boys. I cannot imagine that the jury didn't agree with this. Now, me I'm from a blended family. I can't imagine that children, you could believe these boys who are scared, they're terrified. These confessions are next level, guys. These boys, you can tell they're frightened. You can tell that those police officers are telling them, you can go home once you tell us the truth. You can go home once you tell us the truth. And you're spinning that narrative to a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 16-year-old. Of course, they're going to do whatever they think they're meant to do to help the NYPD. It appeared to me that they truly respected them. They thought they were going to, go home to their parents and be okay. Now, the media at the same time, it's already shaping the narrative as well. The boys were labelled as a wolf pack. The crime was called wilding. Headlines were screaming for massive amounts of punishment, and the courtroom really echoed that same sort of sentiment. One by one, the verdict's in. It's guilty, guilty, guilty. 4 of the boys were sentenced to juvenile detention, but Corey Wise, he's the oldest at 16. He's sent to an adult prison. He serves the longest amount of time, 13 years in total. The city, it breathed a sigh of relief. Justice had been served. But already, beneath that lovely surface, those cracks are starting to form. The confessions didn't match the crime scene at all. The timelines didn't add up. The real attacker is still out there. 13 years passed. The 5 young men had served their sentences. Some were still behind bars. Others were just trying to rebuild their lives. But the truth was still waiting to be heard. Now, in 2002, a man named Matthias Reyes, came forward. Now, he was already serving a life sentence for multiple rapes and murder, and he had a confession. Reyes admitted that he, and he alone, had attacked Trisha in Central Park that night. His DNA matched the evidence from the crime scene. It was a match that had never been made during the initial investigation. The confession was detailed. It had everything. He knew it, every single detail, and it aligned perfectly with all the physical evidence. There's no longer any doubt. So the convictions of the Central Five were vacated. They were exonerated officially and finally. But the damage has already been done, guys. That's years that they've lost. Things that, their reputations have been destroyed. Their families are fractured. And a city was really forced to look at themselves because they'd gone straight to a rush to judgment. This exoneration, it sparks a wave of outrage and a renewed account for accountability, like a call for accountability. In 2003, all 5 men filed civil rights suits against the city of New York. And so they bloody should have, as far as I'm concerned. They sought justice for the years they'd spent behind bars for a crime they'd never committed. It took more than a decade. In 2014, the city actually settled for $41 million. In 2016, the state of New York added another $3.9 million. Their settlement was actually quite historic, apparently. But for those 5, it wasn't just about the money. It was the truth. It was the recognition and the hope that no one else is going to suffer the same fate. Unfortunately, that's just not the case for America. It's not happening at the moment. They begin to speak out. They're advocating. They're educating. Their voices that were once really silenced in all of this, it becomes a really powerful instrument for these change. Now, the Central Park case wasn't just a massive legal failure. It's a cultural reckoning, right? The media coverage had been relentless. It was sensational. And it was deeply, deeply racist. The boys were portrayed as monsters. The word wildling became shorthand for urban violence, and the presumption of guilt was everywhere. The case exposed how race, fear, and media bias can shape public perception and influence justice. So in 2019, the filmmaker Ava released When They See Us, which is a dramatized miniseries that told the story from the boys' perspective. It's raw, it's really emotional, and it reignited the public interest in the case. Suddenly, a new generation is learning the truth, and the exonerated 5 were being seen once again, not as suspects, but as these amazing survivors. Today, the Central Park 5 are now known as the exonerated 5. Their names, Antron, Kevin, Yusuf, Raymond, and Corey, are no longer symbols of injustice. They are symbols of resilience. They've become advocates for criminal justice reform. They speak at schools, they speak at conferences, they speak at rallies, they've built foundations, they've written books, and they've reclaimed their lives and their story. Now, in 2023, Yusuf Salam was elected to the New York City Council, a powerful full circle moment for a man who was once wrongfully convicted. The Central Park jogger case reminds us that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about truth, fairness, and the courage to admit when you were wrong. It's a really good story in the respect of they've taken something so wrong as far as I'm concerned and tried to do so much with it. And I think this is a really powerful moment to think about all the injustice that is done. I don't think I could ever truthfully do a story on the amount of racial injustice that is in that country. That country was my second home. So I'm not saying it doesn't have so many wonderful parts, but there is so much backward thinking there. And it is just, it's not fair. And something needs to get done about it. All right, so we're going to move on to Kalief Browder. So take a moment and listen closely, because Kalief's story is not just history, it's a call to action. He's born in the Bronx in New York. Kalief was just 16 years old when his life was upended by an accusation